So, hi, we're Kate and Sarah, and we're Newcastle University students in our second year of a Masters in Architecture. So, we're going to be talking about our involvement with the design of a welcome pavilion at Northumberlandia. And then following that, we're going to talk around the topic of women in architecture. So, why did we choose to study architecture? Well, I'm Sarah, and I wanted to be a designer from a very young age, originally an interior designer. And I always loved drawing and creating for as long as I can remember, really. But then I only really discovered what an architect was when I was a teenager. And since then, I knew that it was what I wanted to do because I thought it would be a really good way to turn my creative interests into a career.
Hi, I'm Kate. Similarly to kind of Sarah, I've wanted to study architecture since I was quite young. I learned architects design buildings. 11-year-old me loved playing The Sims, so it seemed quite apt. Architecture is a very broad and well-rounded course. Every day is different, even in these kind of lockdowns. Just to talk a bit about the course, it is a course that kind of allows you to explore and follow your interests. We learn about history and geography of places, creative and logical skills for designing, how to communicate and present our work with confidence, and also we have fun with like the design aspect and kind of working on our design skills as well.
So as part of our Masters, we've had the opportunity to take part in a live build project. And so a group of 9 of us students chose to get involved, and we're on the left over there. So Newcastle University School of Architecture actually has undertaken several of these live build projects in the past, and these are mostly dotted around Kielder. And this time the brief was to design a structure for the site entrance at Northumberlandia. So our clients at Northumberland Wildlife Trust really wanted to improve this area of the site and to turn it into a much more social, engaging place to spend time, whereas it's currently more of a passing point. So this is a diagram that we drew early in the design process, which encapsulates some of the key intentions for the project. So we've proposed a much more cohesive arrangement to the existing site layout, with this curved welcome pavilion that responds to and really celebrates the feminine curves of Northumberlandia herself, whilst also incorporating 2-tiered seating that is partially sheltered from the prevailing winds. So this sort of theatre-like shape that faces inwards on the site then can lend itself to kind of serving as an outdoor classroom, for example, for school children. So this just shows really, as we've touched upon, the whole thing is based on this main sort of sweeping feminine curve that completely reshapes the site. And hopefully you can start to imagine maybe a class of school children on a school trip, for example, maybe sitting and eating a packed lunch on the 2-tiered seating. So importantly, we're also designing a full new set of interpretation boards that will be integrated into the overall design. And these will provide an educational aspect. So they'll show things like species of wildlife that can be seen on the site throughout the seasons. So this will help the scheme transform the site into a much more engaging spot and somewhere where you'd like to spend a bit of time whilst visiting Northumberlandia. And then this visual helps to summarize those main design concepts and also explains just a few additional details. So overall, as you can see, really, the pavilion really allows the site to become like a much more engaging social and educational hub. And luckily, in light of the COVID, many unexpected hurdles that have ended up emerging throughout this project, as you can imagine, we'd actually planned from the outset to digitally manufacture the pieces of our pavilion before assembling them, much like a piece of flat pack furniture. So this has allowed us to manufacture the pavilion remotely in our university workshops, which has been a lot safer than it might have been. So this is still an ongoing process, but it means that once the pieces are ready, the pavilion can be constructed on site in the summer pretty quickly and easily. And we're really happy with the way it's looking so far, as you can see in the photos here of these 2 test fit modules. So to introduce the topic of women in architecture, This diagram just briefly explains the pathways to qualify as an architect. So in red and yellow here are some relatively new alternative routes. One is an apprenticeship, and both of them basically allow a student to study and work at the same time. But by far the most common route actually, and the traditional route, which Kate and I are currently on, is the blue route here, which is made up of a 3-year degree, followed by a year in practice, and then a 2-year master's, and finally the part 3, which usually takes around a year. So this total is 7 years, although for most people it actually takes a little bit longer. And Kate and I are in stage 6 here. So like many professions in the UK, as most people are probably aware, architecture is historically and is currently male dominated. So the Architects Registration Board in 2018, their figures showed that women actually accounted for 28% of ARB registered architects. So although there's still an imbalance, the figures have actually shown positive signs of change throughout recent years. So for example, back in 2003, this same figure actually stood at just 14%. And the chart here just shows that upwards trajectory of the number as well as the percentage of women in architecture. And that positive change, as you might expect, is largely down to a higher number of female new entrants. So that means that the younger generation of architectural professionals is actually much more equally split in terms of gender. So the ARB figures show that gender split for those under 30 in the profession is actually around 52% male versus 48% female. So this definitely shows a positive shift that's taken place within the profession over recent years, which you can also see in this chart, which shows the gender balance of undergraduate architecture students. And in 2018 here, it's actually 44% female new entrants. So however, another less obvious issue relating to gender in architecture is actually one of authorship. So historically, again, like many professions, the contributions of women have often actually been overlooked, really. And nowadays, this issue hasn't completely gone away. And there are cases, for example, where architecture firms that are actually run by equal male and female partnerships receive prizes for their work, but prizes actually awarded to their male counterpart within what is actually an equal partnership. And then there's this example here, without going into too much detail, the BBC photoshopped Patty Hopkins, co-founder of Hopkins Architects, out of this promotional image for the Brits who built the modern world. And you can still see that Michael Hopkins is on the left here on the bottom photo and on the top. So it's important not to overlook this issue, but really it just highlights the importance of talking about women in architecture and not just talking about their gender, as we have done already here, but more importantly, talking about their work. And over the years, actually, many female architects have argued exactly this. So they even hold the viewpoint often that talking about gender can actually overshadow an opportunity to talk about women's architectural work. So it is an interesting debate, but without further ado, the remaining slides are actually all about women's contribution to architecture.
So I guess I'm going to be talking about like the history of women in architecture. I'll also touch upon some kind of prizes that have been awarded, and also kind of going into kind of contemporary artists and architects who you might recognise today as well. So in terms of history, we've got this kind of presentation slide that shows early examples of women in Britain playing an important part in architecture. So firstly, one of the examples is Lady Elizabeth Wilbraham. She was born in 1632. She was put forward as the architect of Wotton House in Buckinghamshire, and also many other buildings. It's actually been suggested that she tutored Sir Christopher Wren, but she had to use male architects to supervise her construction work so that she wasn't kind of getting her boots muddy on site. And then we've got Mary Townley, born in 1753. She designed several buildings in Ramsgate, southeast England, including Townley House. And then finally, Sarah Losh, born in 1785. She was actually a landowner in Ray. She's been described as a bit of a lost romantic genius, architect and visionary. And her main work is St Mary's Church, Cumbria. So architecture became organised as a profession around 1850. The number of women has always been historically low, but this is changing, kind of as Sarah was talking about previously. So these are kind of early examples of women in the profession. So there's Ethel Charles. She was the first woman to be admitted to Britain's Royal Institute of British Architects, which is RIBA, as we know today. And that was in 1898. So as a woman, unfortunately, she was unable to obtain large-scale commissions, but she did kind of concentrate on modest housing projects such as labourers' cottages. And then we've got Edith Hughes. She's a Scottish lady who attended kind of lectures on art and architecture at the Sorbonne. She studied at Gray's School of Art in Aberdeen, and then she received a diploma in architecture in 1914. So now, in addition to like teaching at Glasgow School of Art, she also established her own practice in 1920, which specialised in kitchen design. And then Elizabeth Scott was the first woman to design a major public building in Britain. She's the architect behind the Shakespeare Memorial Theatre at Stratford-upon-Avon, and that was 1932. Going on to kind of the Pritzker Prize winners, several women architects or women in architecture have had considerable success in recent years, gaining wide recognition for their achievements. This slide shows the 5 women who have received Pritzker prizes. The prize is awarded annually to honour a living architect or architects whose built work demonstrates a combination of those qualities of talent, vision and commitment, which has produced consistent and significant contributions to humanity and the built environment through the art of architecture. So in 2004, it was Zaha Hadid, 2010 was Kazuyo Sejima, 2017 it was Kame Pijam, and in 2020 was the female partnership of Grafton architects, Yvonne Farrell and Shelley McNamara from Ireland. In terms of contemporary architects, it's obviously worth us kind of talking about them. We've got Elizabeth Diller. She is an architect with an artistic turn of mind. She's one of 4 of the world-renowned firm Diller, Scavidio and Renfro. Elizabeth Diller has led the design development for some of the country's most anticipated museum buildings in the past decade. In 2018, she was the only architect to be featured in Time magazine's annual list of 100 most influential people. Her career highlights include leading the design of the Broad, the Shed and the expansion of MoMA. And we've got Frida Escobedo, founder of Frida Escobedo Tala de Arquitectura in Mexico City. She's known for kind of working closely with arts and cultural sectors. She designed London's 2018 Serpentine Gallery and kind of other site-specific installations, architectural interventions at the V&A, for example, Museo Jumex, and also the Lisbon Architecture Triennale. Then we've got more kind of noteworthy contemporary architects. Anna Heringer, she recently won the Aga Khan Award for Architecture for her METI handmade school, which is built with bamboo and other local materials in Bangladesh. So this is really importantly an example of sustainable architecture, which is kind of becoming a big thing and very much at the forefront of architecture design nowadays. The project's praised not only for its simple and humane approach to beauty, but also for like the level of cooperation that was achieved between architects and the craftsmen, the client and the users. So it was kind of a very well-rounded project. We've also kind of notably got Titania Bilbao. She's known for kind of creating groundbreaking low-income social housing. She began her career advising for Mexico City's Department of Urban Housing and Development before going on to start her eponymous studio practice, as well as kind of collaborative research centres as well. So she's a leader in Mexico's kind of new design wave contemporary architects, and she's completed a range of projects internationally. And then one of the examples that we use kind of in architecture school, and it gets kind of mentioned quite a lot, is kind of the Smithsons. So Alison Smithson, who works alongside Peter Smithson, they're often associated with New Brutalism. So they're notable for the Hunstanton Secondary Modern School, Norfolk, which was 1954. It's generally recognised as the first example of New Brutalism, which is essentially like an approach to architecture that often stressed kind of stark presentation of materials and structure. And then finally, we've got kind of art meeting architecture. So there are also kind of female contemporary artists who have strong ties with architecture, and they also should be celebrated. Another layer to their work is that they show that architecture can be very political. So this is Emily Speed and Rachel Whiteread that we've used as examples. In Emily Speed's work, which is the kind of work on the right side of the slide, she examines the relationship between architecture and the body. Her practice considers how a person is shaped by the buildings that they have occupied, and also how a person occupies their own psychological space. And then famously, Rachel Whiteread, she's the first woman to win the annual Turner Prize in 1993. So her work focuses on capturing moments in time by using cast work. For example, her untitled bookshelves, which are shown on the left at the top. And here she's kind of cast the negative of the shelves. So it's quite an interesting kind of architectural kind of interior design kind of piece of installation. So that's everything from us. So we've talked about kind of the Northumberlandia project, kind of current issues of like women within architecture, the fact that numbers are rising, and then also kind of historically celebrating women who kind of started out in architecture, and also kind of contemporary architects and artists now.
So thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the presentation, and we hope you learned something new about women in architecture.
Thanks very much. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.